Hello and welcome to another edition of That Millwall podcast. Today we're bringing you another Who Are You? I'm joined today by one of our followers on Twitter, Dr Andrew Flemming. Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well, mate. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Good to have you on the show. As I said, this is part of our Who Are You series, where we get to know the stories behind some of our fans who we may not necessarily be interact with or we see or come across on a match day. So we're going to go straight into it. Andrew, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, sure, mate. I'm Andrew. I've been working overseas for the last 8.5 years. I'm a diplomat with Her Majesty's government. I was in India for the last 5.5 years, 3 years before that in Nigeria. Now I'm back in my home, which is somewhere outside of Croydon, in a place called Wallington that no one's ever heard of. But at least there's a easy connection up to the Den from there. And I stay here for a bit. Probably I'll go back abroad again before the end of the year. So just a temporary time, but it gives me a chance to get to a few more games than I'm normally able to.
So with that, obviously with your work, obviously travelling quite a lot. Are you able to keep up with the results quite frequently? Is there easy to access abroad or?
Yeah, I mean, results are good. Sometimes where I've been living, the internet isn't. So I've not had very good success watching live stream, but I tend to rely on Twitter and following games on Twitter, and quite often because of the time difference, the match is happening and I'm out representing Her Majesty's government at some dinner or something, and I'm trying to watch the Twitter while I'm sitting at the table. My wife's digging me in the ribs, saying, "Put your bloody phone away," or I'm about to give a speech and then we will score, and it's like, but yeah. So I do manage to watch it, and then occasionally I'm actually at a match because wherever I go, I'll find a local team to support. So I've been supporting for 5.5 years Hyderabad FC. They actually won their championship last season, and sometimes I'm at a match, they're under the cosh, and there's me cheering away because Millwall have just scored a goal or something, or vice versa. They score, and I'm like, oh, bloody hell. But yeah, we have those moments from time to time.
Flying the flag in India, which is always good to hear. So it's quite interesting, obviously, with your work and travelling, and why Millwall? How did Millwall come about?
Okay, it's a bit of a story,
right.
But let me say that I originally, when I first got into football, I was a Wimbledon fan. I had been taken to some other clubs in South London, not Millwall. I think my old man was too scared to take me there. But I went to Palace. First match was there. I liked the football, but I wasn't too impressed with the club. Later on, I went to Wimbledon. One of the big deals for Wimbledon was my parents said, "Oh, you can go and watch this lot on your own." So being 10, 11, that was a big seller for me. So I supported Wimbledon all the way from the late 70s up until the Milton Keynes business and the move. Terrible business, really. After that, I got into I was one of the founder members of the new AFC Wimbledon, but let's just say I had a falling out, because that would be a whole different episode with them. But at some point, long before that, apart from watching Wimbledon, I was just football mad. I've got dyspraxia, so I can't play any sport. I've got no coordination at all. But I became a football referee. And the main reason I became a football referee, because it was the best paid job in the early 80s for a teenager. You earned like £5 an hour refereeing youth matches. So I do those and have my cash to go and watch football the rest of the time. So I I went to 531 consecutive Wimbledon matches, so I was a proper
Nice.
Wimbledon fan. But at the same time, there were some other clubs around London that I enjoyed watching, and Millwall was increasingly one of them. And as we went through the 80s, so I went more and more to Millwall games, and I always enjoyed going to Millwall, probably because of the atmosphere and the whole fan thing there. It just appealed to me. So yeah, so it was a bit like that. That I liked it, but after my falling out with AFC and all of that, which was a bit unfortunate, I was really happily watching non-league football. I've been at 840 odd grounds around the world. I quite like watching different places. Still love non-league football as well. But when we had kids, there was an episode. My missus, she's Vietnamese, and she went off back to Vietnam. The smallest was 4 then. She comes back with a fake Chelsea shirt. I can't think of anything more disgusting. Well, maybe one thing, but pretty bad. Huh? So she gave it to my boy, and I said, "Look, this just isn't on. You can't give him a thing like this." Yeah. So anyway, she went off to get the moral support of my father, who always gives it to her, and he did give it to her, as in, "What on earth have you done? This is ridiculous." I paraphrase, and then he called me and said, "She's on her way home now. I've told her exactly what I think of that." Turns up, long face, never disappeared. Boy cried for 3 days. I want to support a team that plays in blue. Well, I'm not taking him to Chelsea, obviously. That's obvious. I'm not taking him to Wimbledon. Who was at home that weekend? Millwall were at home. And as I said, I'm fond of Millwall anyway, so I decided, yep, let's go there. And we went, and we had a fantastic experience. Great family club. I knew that anyway. And the boy was hooked from then, and he's 10 years later, 11 years later, he's still a big Millwall fan. So he was part of the catalyst. I mean, I guess if I was going to watch league football, I would have gone to Millwall anyway, but he sort of made it a lot more than I would have probably done. So that's really the story in a nutshell.
It's quite interesting there, just to say that you've obviously watched a lot of football around the world and gone to a lot of places. How does it compare to some of the grounds abroad? I imagine the atmospheres can be very different in different places. So I don't think you quite get anything quite like the Den.
No, but the old Den was better.
Well,
I've moved back there tomorrow.
It's interesting because we will come on to that. I mean, you said obviously during the 80s that you obviously went to a few Wimbledon games and Millwall games. Do you remember your first Millwall game? Do you remember who that was against?
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, I was a Wimbledon season ticket holder, so it would have been August 1981. We were playing you at home, first game of the season. It was the first. Yeah, no, it wasn't the first season. I went on my own second season, but I had my season ticket, and off I went. There was never anybody on the train from my station at Wadden over to Wimbledon. It was only a little 2-carriage train. Never anybody ever got on it. Got off at Hayden's Road. That day, I got on the train. When it got to Wimbledon, I mean, I'd never seen so many people get on a train in my life. And there was all these fellas sitting around me, all Millwall fans. I mean, most of them didn't wear any colours. I was there with my Wimbledon stuff on, and they were all like, "Oh, you're a Wimbledon fan," blah blah blah. I was like, "My God!" But they were such nice guys. We had a good laugh. We chatted. We walked to the ground together. My parents said, "Oh, it's Millwall. You've got to be very careful." I was like, "Put the fear of God in me." But no, the fans were fantastic, and I just thought, yeah. Like anything else in life, you should see and experience and not go by what other people say. So I guess that gave me a soft spot for Millwall. I wasn't very happy you beat us that day 3-1. And I was massively impressed with the fans that day. The atmosphere was brilliant. As a kid, I was always up for a good atmosphere at a match, and it was just quite electric, especially from your lot. And yeah, and after that, I saw a lot of Wimbledon Millwall matches over the years in well, 3 of the 4 divisions. And you know, sometimes I was happy from one side, sometimes from the other, and over the years I've been happy from both sides, I guess.
Do you still look out? Obviously, I know you said earlier that you'd had a sort of a bit of a falling out with those at Wimbledon. Do you still look out for their results? Do they still have a place?
I look out and see if they lost. Yeah.
Okay.
No, they've got no place in my heart. The original club I absolutely loved, but the new one, though. I mean, probably if I have a second team, it's Sutton United because it's in the borough I was born, and I'll go and watch them sometimes. And they've obviously had 1 or 2 Millwall players on loan at different points, so
yeah,
I go down there occasionally.
Okay, and obviously you touched on there. I think you said you preferred the Old Den. Where did you, when you went to games at the Old Den? Where did you stand or sit? Where was your spot, or was you one that moved around?
I've watched from every part of the ground, including the away end. I used to collect money sometimes in the away end because they used to throw coins at us. But that helped me pay for my next match. So I wasn't complaining.
Absolutely, no. Say that.
But when I was watching Millwall, and through the 80s, that increasingly was the case. Even before I was, probably Millwall was like my second club by then. I would either go a halfway line or somewhere on the corner between there and Ilderton Road End. They're like up until a certain point, you could sort of sit on a bit of concrete at the base of the floodlight. And a few young lads did that, so I used to like going there and watching from that corner. So quite often that was one of my favourite places. But sometimes when it was a bigger crowd, it would be more sort of halfway line. I was quite short as a kid, so I would normally go down the front. Not the best of views, but when it was quieter. But yeah, but as I say, I've been every section of that ground, including the original seats and cold blow low end, everything. So seeing it from all angles.
And what were your memories of the Old Den? What obviously you said there about the atmosphere being obviously probably playing a part when you was a bit younger, but what are your memories of the ground and the atmosphere there?
I mean, the atmosphere there when it was a decent crowd was amazing. Almost irreplaceable to anything I've seen or heard anywhere on a crazy night. And we're going to come on to talk about memorable nights, I think, at some point. So I'll say that. But I mean, it was a unique ground. You were close to the action. I have a weird interest in like old football stadiums. I'll travel 200 miles to go and visit one if I know it's going to be knocked down. The old Millwall ground with all its terracing and the way it was done, the crash barriers and fences and everything. It was just irreplaceable. You'll never find another ground like that ever anywhere. There's some pretty special places around the world, but that was one of them. It's just beyond anything else. I really, really liked it. A lot of my friends didn't, but I did, and what can I say?
It's interesting the way you kind of described the old ground. Obviously, unfortunately, my first game was in '94, so we'd obviously moved to the new Den. We'd moved to the new Den by then, so I never really got to experience it. But the way that you've described it there, and the way that a lot of people describe it, it was a unique place. It was a one of a kind. You probably, as you say, and you probably the best person to ask, having travelled around the world. Probably very, very unlikely to find anywhere like the Old Den, I imagine.
Not many places like it. It's funny. One ground I went to that reminded me a little bit of the Old Den was the Ferencváros ground in Budapest, and of course Millwall played them
Yes,
some
yes, I
years
did. Yeah.
ago as well. But the original ground has been redeveloped now, and it looks nothing like it did.
Mm.
It might as well have moved. But the original ground had that similar character. There was a few more seats there, but it was that same close to the pitch feel. Lots of terracing around. Really passionate fans. It was probably the nearest comparator that I would give. And I was at the old Den actually for the last game against Bristol Rovers,
Mm-hmm.
which was a really sad day. I felt. I'm sure many Millwall fans did. I didn't manage to get any memorabilia on my way out, unfortunately. But hey,
No, my dad obviously was. He was the reason I support the club, and he was there that day as well, and says it's a very. I can't imagine it must be like to leave a ground. Obviously, I've never gone through that with us at the new ground. So, but moving on, obviously moving towards the new ground, I get the feeling. I think I know where you may go with this. But what do you make of the new Den? It's obviously the Den now. After I think this is our 30th. This is our 30th year at the new place. Do you like it, and where do you sit?
I mean it's better and better design than a lot of the other new grounds. Who still got that relative closeness to the action, which I think is really important in football. First of all, and the architects did a good job if they were trying to ensure that there was a good atmosphere in the grounds, because a lot of new grounds are soulless, and you can't really
Yes.
say that the Den is that. It has got still an intimidating atmosphere for
Mm-hmm.
visitors, which I think is important. Actually, with our budget, we need the 12th man, don't we? So
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean it's okay. I quite like it. I'm a bit short-sighted, so my preference, and because I haven't got a season ticket, having been away and just come back and going
Yeah,
away
of
again
course.
at an unknown date, I have to get what I can when I turn up, and sometimes I don't even get in. But Barry Kitchener Block 3 is usually my preference. That's where I'm sitting tomorrow for the Burnley match.
Right.
Got my Swansea ticket in advance, well in advance. I think I'm away for the one in the middle against Norwich. But that's where I'd go if I have a choice. I mean, I used to sit in the family block when the kids were little, and I
Yeah,
thought that
of
was
course.
brilliant.
Yeah.
They did a great job over there. But I prefer that. And of course, if it's an afternoon match, you don't have the sun in your eyes like you will in the Dockers.
Yeah, I mean I think that's one thing, isn't it? That I think you touched on there, the architects and the atmosphere in the ground is always, especially when it's rocking. I think the last couple of games and probably the last few seasons when there's been a lot of excitement and around the club, the atmosphere really does build inside the ground. And I think it's another thing you touched on there, that the fact that you're so close to the players. I think they try to possibly, from what I've heard, capture maybe what the old Den was. Whilst they couldn't have it exactly the same, they try to make it that you are on top of the opposition, and some players do struggle with that kind of intimidating atmosphere, and I think they needed to do that.
Definitely, and I think I remember them saying that was part of their intention.
Okay, moving on. I'm going to talk about some players now and some managers. Obviously, based on what you said there, so you've got sort of around 40 years worth of players to narrow this down. Who's your favourite all-time Millwall player?
There's two players probably that I'll mention. One before I was really a regular fan, but I was watching you, and one after. So the one when I was sort of quite often getting to see Millwall when I wasn't watching Wimbledon was Terry Hurlock.
Right.
I mean, dirty little so and so, but absolutely 100% always. I mean, I think he epitomised what the club stands for in many ways.
Yeah.
I really, really like the guy. Seeing him once in his 60s or something, all his hair's gone now. But but great. Blue heart when he was playing for us, and whatever other colour when he was playing for other clubs. But yeah, and then Morrison's the other player that I really like. Again, didn't get so many yellow and red cards, but work rate incredible, and he outshone Terry on appearances as well. So yeah, I mean, when I was a fan and going to games, I knew that 9 out of 10 times he was going to be one of the top 2 or 3 players in our side. So I really like him. The boys like him as well.
It's interesting because I think Steve Morrison. Sorry, go on.
No, I say except for the older one who suddenly decided to defect to another club, but that's another story. But the younger one, definitely.
It's interesting with Steve Morrison, I think, because he is a Marmite footballer in many ways. Where Millwall fans are concerned, you're either on the fence that you love him or you don't. Me personally, I was always a fan of Steve. He was. I thought he was a great footballer for us, a really important figure in recent times, and perhaps part of the reason why we're successful today, because I think he did a lot for the club, obviously on the pitch, and he was very good off it, I think as well. And with obviously Terry Hurlock, I think there'll be a lot of supporters from the 80s that you probably find a lot, as you say, typified what it meant to be a Millwall player. Possibly played a little bit, obviously without seeing him. I don't want to do him an injustice here, but possibly played a little bit like how a fan would, with his heart on his sleeve and giving everything. And I think that's something that the supporters were able to connect with, because that's what they would do. He was just doing what they would do. But onto the manager. I would imagine that there's probably a couple of candidates here that you could choose from. But who would you say was your favourite manager? And perhaps not necessarily as an individual, but perhaps was it the style of play, the success that was achieved, or what is it about whoever you say?
I mean, John Doherty is the only manager that took us into the top division, even though I wasn't really saying I was a Millwall fan then. That was an achievement, and what an amazing half the season he had in the first half of the season. We were there as well. I mean that was brilliant, and I admired him even as an opposing fan at that time. So and it was unfortunate the second season was so bad. And eventually he went before the season was out. And fans always have short memories, I feel. So as good as somebody might be at a certain point, when things aren't going well, they're very quick to jump on the back. And maybe Millwall fans are even quicker than some other clubs. I don't know. I wouldn't like to say that, but
I think you're definitely right with that. I think as a manager, especially if you've had success or you've had a real big thing, I think you're right. If you don't then have success, you're struggling to keep the fans on board at whatever club. And I think at Mill that really is something that they want to be successful.
Who doesn't?
No, of course, but I think. Of course, and unfortunately, football is a bit of a results business, isn't it? If you're not winning on the pitch, then unfortunately, managers and backroom staff are the ones that tend to be shown the door. Moving back to players, I'm going to ask this question in two. So we've got the worst Millwall player that you've ever seen, and the worst player that you've ever seen play against Millwall.
All right. Well, I don't normally do worst, because I just think it's too negative.
It is a hard question.
It's a hard question, but like in my work and all of that, I try to avoid being too ultra critical about worst. And I even struggle with the worst player that I've seen. But I have to say that as recently as Saturday, and bearing in mind I'm a proud Scot. I'm half Scottish anyway. Ollie McBurney, absolutely appalling. In 30 seconds, trying to get 2 people sent off with his antics, and rightfully getting booked. He should have got sent off himself because he committed 2 yellow cards offences in that space. And I absolutely detest any player anywhere that plays in that in that cheating way of just trying to get a fellow professional, but just fellow player sent off, which is blatantly what he was doing. And it wasn't the only incident in the game that he did it either. So at the moment, as of today, he is my worst player that I've seen. I will forget, and there'll be somebody else that comes along later. But he really annoyed me on Saturday. My God, I was almost ashamed to be Scottish.
It's one of those. I think sometimes when you think about players that play against the club, you don't often see them enough. They might have a bad game, but it doesn't make them necessarily the worst player. I do agree that McBurney I think he was quite poor on the game on Saturday. And I think in terms of, with the worst Millwall player, I'm of the opinion that whoever puts on a Millwall shirt, whoever it is, whether they're on loan, whether they've been signed or they've come through the academy, you've got to try and back them. When I did this myself, I very much struggled to answer that question. There have been some bad players down the line, but it's hard to narrow it to a worse. So perhaps I'll reword the question. Is there anybody that you were kind of pleased to perhaps see shown the door or sold or loaned out?
Probably quite a lot, but let me stick by my virtue that I should be supportive of anybody that's played in a Millwall shirt.
Okay.
And maybe one day there will be somebody that really does my head in.
No, that's absolutely fine. As I say, I think it's hard to criticise sometimes the players that play for your club. You try to support them through thick and thin. I know sometimes they might have bad games, but I don't necessarily think they mean to. It's just sometimes it's just how it goes. Moving on to moments and games. Most memorable match involving Millwall. Now, it doesn't necessarily. It can be from a Wimbledon perspective. It can be obviously from a Millwall perspective. But what would you say is your most memorable?
It's definitely going to be from a Millwall perspective, but it was still when I was more of a Wimbledon fan.
Okay.
And that would have been. I remember the day, 19th of February, 1985. Leicester City at home in the FA Cup replay, where we did them 2-0. 2 divisions above us. It was just an amazing night. It was that one of those nights where the old den was absolutely rocking. I remember John Fashion, who I think got the first goal. He obviously then got sold to Wimbledon, so I got to know him a bit better then, and then I got to know him even better when I was working in Nigeria, because that's where he lives these days. So all the way back to his early days. But yeah, it was just an amazing night. The whole place was just completely buzzing. I don't think I've been to many matches where there's been a better atmosphere at a single game than that. And I know a lot of other fans have mentioned that match.
It's interesting that you pick a cup game, because I think that the cup tends to bring out the best in the fans, obviously at Millwall, and I think it tends to bring out sometimes the best in the players. Obviously, we've got history in the FA Cup more recently, but I think it definitely the FA Cup does something to our supporters, and I think when the team may be up against a stronger opposition, we tend to be at our best.
I think so, and it's just a pity, really, that more clubs aren't still like that. The FA Cup's been so devalued in my lifetime of watching football. Anyway, it would be hardest to get into a ground in the 70s and 80s after the 4th round to watch an FA Cup match. And now it's probably the easiest opportunity you get to watch any of the top flight teams.
and tends to be now discounted prices as well now, to try and encourage fans to actually go into the grounds.
I was telling my boy it was cheaper to go and watch the Sheffield United match with him and his girlfriend than it was for me to buy one ticket for the match the other day.
Mm. And that's just, I mean, I think the magic of the FA Cup, certainly for teams perhaps lower down the footballing chain, the magic is still there. I think the magic for me as a fan, I do love the FA Cup. I will admit, obviously this year, I think our priorities may needed to have lied somewhere else. But I do love a cup run, and I enjoy watching us, take on that underdog tag and try and take on the bigger boys, so-called bigger boys.
Well, let's be clear. I wouldn't swap the results around. So I was very happy.
No, I think there's a lot of supporters that would probably, myself included, that probably feel the same. Obviously, that the match you mentioned against Leicester being your favourite match, but favourite moment. Millwall moment? Been supporting the club?
Probably. I mean, I caught a glimpse of Gary Lineker's face in that match, and
right.
I mean, he just looked like a rabbit caught in headlights. It was just really funny. It always lives with me. I didn't like him much as a player. I just thought he was a goal hanger. Probably a bit harsh, but there you are. And I'm not a big fan of him now. I think just opportunist and says whatever's popular, and he's not always said the nicest things about us. So
no, he hasn't.
It was that moment that always makes me smile. I still have it in my head like it was like last night.
It's interesting because you don't often think about things like that, but I would imagine that they're the sort of things that you don't get to see very often. And when you see someone that was considered a top player, an England international, scored a lot of goals, to have that kind of perhaps say fear of the den, it doesn't escape anyone. It never will escape anyone.
Won't escape me.
I mean, that leads me on perhaps to the funniest Millwall moment. I would imagine, does that fall into the same category?
Well, that was funny enough. I mean, but honestly, the funniest moment for me is a very personal thing. It didn't really involve what was on the pitch. It's more really a shout out for that family stand atmosphere and stuff when the kids were little. So it would have been 2014, first game of the season. We played Leeds, and my in-laws were visiting from Vietnam. So I decided to take my father-in-law, who would have been, what age would he have been then? 75 plus. Took him to his first ever football match at the Den to watch us beat Leeds. It was probably about the only highlight of the entire season. And with the two boys and that. And at the end, him dancing to Rocking All Over the World with the biggest smile on his face. I've still got the videos somewhere. That was just both really happy and really funny, and everything all wrapped up. I still watch it now sometimes when I'm feeling a bit down.
It's amazing how a story like that, it's people that have never been to the Den or have never been to a football match, and obviously in your father-in-law's case, the Den does something to people that it can't be explained. The atmosphere it sucks you in, and you just get lost in it. And especially, obviously, when you mentioned you played against Leeds, I would imagine the atmosphere being quite electric from the start. So, and it's nice that it's a personal moment as well. Sometimes when we hear some of these, it's something that's happened in a game or a player that's done something. But it's nice that you've got that memory obviously with your father-in-law, and that's something that, as you say, will stay with you forever.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks. I mean, I've brought a lot of people from around the world to the Den over the years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like to think I'm a bit of an ambassador of Millwall. You know, amazing how many people you can talk about Millwall to anywhere in any country, and you'll get this very stereotypical response. But if we manage to take the conversation 5 minutes further, I'm getting them to change their mind. And if they come to the UK, I bring them along, and they're completely converted. And there's so many people that's happened to.
Well, you must be doing a very good job, because I think the popularity abroad as well. There's a lot of fans that are coming from abroad. I know we've had obviously the influence of signing players from Europe, that we've had some fans from the Netherlands and obviously from Germany following Vogelsammer and Flemming. But I think abroad we are starting to. So perhaps you're credited for starting a lot of supporters across the globe for becoming Lions.
Doing my best. There's a few Millwall shirts been brought that are worn in Nigeria and India.
Excellent. I mean, you again, possibly touching on something that we've already spoke about. The best story about following Millwall, I would imagine that the story of your father-in-law is probably up there. But is there any other stories that you've got that perhaps maybe top that or equal to that?
Best story of following Millwall. You know, I regret that I don't get to go watch many away games. So
Right.
It's only once in a while I have the chance, and when I do, because of the club's membership policy, I normally have to watch it from a different part of the ground. So
right, okay.
I've had a few incidents in that situation where I've really had to keep my hands clasped or sit on them or keep my mouth shut or fail to do any of it, and then pay the price of being glared at, usually happily not evicted anywhere yet. So there's been a few of those moments. It doesn't really replicate that special moment with the father-in-law, to be honest.
Of course.
But yeah, no, it's a bit like that. I mean, I really look forward to the time that I can start getting to some away games, because you know, when I used to follow Wimbledon all over the country, it was nothing like it. But it's almost impossible to overcome the restrictions of being able to do that with Millwall, unless you're a ticket holder and you're going regularly, which is a bit unfortunate, but in my case. But there you are.
I mean, I am myself. I am a season ticket holder, so I years gone by, I went to lots of away games. I still go to as many as I can. I obviously do a lot more, obviously a lot of the home games. But I think the membership and the season ticket issue, I think there's a lot of perhaps old school football fans that were used to being able to go to games. You know, you pay your ticket, you pay your money on the door, and you go into football grounds. You just can't do that anymore. Yeah. You just can't do that anymore. And I think sometimes you lose. I think, and I to a certain extent, I can understand it, but you lose the walk up. Like, people might wake up on a Saturday morning and perhaps, you know what, I fancy this one today. I fancy going to wherever in the country, but they're not able to do so, which I think you do lose a little bit of. You do lose some supporters that way.
You definitely do. You definitely do. I was definitely one of those kids.
Bringing it to just before we bring it a little bit more to today's team, best away day. I know you've obviously said there that you don't get to as many as you would like. Is there any away days that you have done that you could say was up there when following the club?
So let me think. I mean, I suppose Wembley doesn't count, because of course we had the record number of fans in Wembley once. I wasn't there that day, but I was there when we were very close against Wigan in the semi-final. Definitely a day to forget, for every reason other than the fact that there was such a magnificent following there. So that was pretty special. I guess the other away day I went, again, it's going back to when we were in the top division. There was a notorious game against Arsenal, our first season up, But I went the second season, and it was a midweek match in February. And there was another massive Millwall following there for that. It was still back in the days that you could just walk up. I'm sure we weren't far off matching the number of Arsenal fans in the ground, and we got off with a really good 0-0 draw in that awful season. So, again, it was just that Millwall away atmosphere, and sometimes the away atmosphere, as you'll know from going away, can be better in many ways than at home. It was just constant throughout the 90 minutes, which I'm sure helped the boys pull off what was a good result in an awful season. So I remember that game, I think, especially.
I think you're right there with away from home. I think sometimes you kind of feel like it's a little bit of a siege mentality. You're outnumbered, but you're not frightened. You know you're outnumbered, but you're going to do your very best to make sure that you're heard and do what you can to make sure the boys know that you're there supporting them. So I do agree. I think away from home, the atmospheres can be, especially when they're doing well, if you go ahead or you win, the atmospheres away from home can be very, very special. Just quick moving into today's team. I know you've obviously said that you've been travelling for work and perhaps not been to as many games, but now getting to a couple. Who's your favourite player in the current squad?
Well, I mean, obviously there's my namesake, who's been doing very well this season, although I haven't actually seen him play a decent game at all. And It was rather funny on Saturday. I had a whole group of fans by me that were really giving it to him. Like I said, short of patience if things aren't going well. So it was rather ironic sitting there hearing the name Flemming yelled out in negative terms for 90 minutes. But on the other hand, I thought that Tom Bradshaw, of course, stood out on Saturday. Brilliant performance, 5-star. So I take away he was my favourite player that day. But I mean, you can go to another game and it can be George Long at the other end that pulls it off with just keeping us in the game and keeping us that clean sheet. So I really don't go in for this favourite player thing. I think it's more of a younger generation thing. When I was a kid, I had my favourites, but now I will just go from one match to the next and probably I'll forget what I saw the week before. So yeah, I just like to see these boys get on and enjoy celebrating which with whoever puts in the good performance.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think sometimes with favourite player, that tends to be more of a you do have your favourites as a child or as a teenager, perhaps growing up, and as you get older, it's more of a team thing. And I think in the Millwall team at the moment, I think it is such a team at the moment. There isn't obviously Flemming is probably the best player, but I think the team are so close knit and everybody's in it together type thing. I think it is difficult to pick one because they all giving everything for the shirt. So sometimes it is hard to pick one. And I think, as I say, the squad at the moment are it's a very good team. It's a very good team, I must admit. This is an interesting question that I'm going to come on to because obviously what we've discussed earlier with perhaps your history with another club. Most disliked opponent. Go on. Sorry, go on.
I saw this, and I'm not supposed to like my principle of not saying who I really can't stand. There's a few clubs I really can't stand. I probably don't follow the convention with Millwall too much, since I have a load of family that support that other side. But
okay.
As a Wimbledon fan, just like a Hammers fan wrote a book once, An Irrational Hatred of Luton. So I have an irrational hatred of Luton, which formed before I became a real Millwall supporter. I was only a half a Millwall supporter, I suppose, at that time. And that really was because of the bloody inconvenience of somebody thinking that they can stop away fans going to football, which is one of the worst social experiments ever conducted in this country, I feel. And the other club that did it to me while I was in that same position was Manchester United. they also chose to ban away supporters for a period of time because of redevelopment work at Old Trafford, even though their capacity, I think, was still in the top three in the country, which I thought was outrageous. And would other clubs even have been allowed to do it? So it's that sense that you can really do that irks me, and I suppose it's those two clubs that I have the least time for as a result. And I know I shouldn't still harbour it 30 years later, but I'm afraid, I've got a good memory and I'm a bitter old sod, so I do.
I think sometimes with that though, there's certain teams that you might not necessarily, in terms of say Millwall, the obvious candidates, but sometimes you might play against a team or something happens and you just instantly think, right, that's it. No time for them, and you kind of always secretly look for their results. So I don't think it's necessarily bitter to hold on to those things. That sticks with you. I mean, the next question I was going to say, perhaps if we could narrow it to a top three. You've given me two, so if I have to push you and put you on the spot to give me a third, where are you going?
Well, I'm afraid it's you know where it's going to go because of what I said earlier.
Okay.
So that's your three.
Okay, I mean, I obviously can understand. Obviously, without going into too much detail, I would imagine.
No, we won't go into the detail of that.
A lot that's gone on, but I can understand. Obviously, based on what you've said, there's probably a lot of frustration there. So we'll move swiftly on from that. If you could change anything about Millwall, whether that be from the past, at the present, or perhaps in the future, what would it be?
Past. Let me give me more than one answer, if that's all right.
Okay. Yeah, of
Past.
course.
I wish we'd never moved out of the old ground. I know that's absolutely ridiculous, but I just love that place. It's unique. It can never be replicated. Of course, it was completely impractical to stay there for a whole set of reasons. It could never have been converted into what we need to meet with all the rules and requirements nowadays. But in an utopia, I would have stayed there. Happy days. Present, I would love to find a better way of being able to get ad hoc tickets to follow them home and away. I don't know why we go and play away matches in grounds where there's 30,000 capacity and we've got 1,200 tickets and they won't give us any more. I think it's utterly ridiculous. And, it can't be doing the clubs any good because, most of the championship teams are in some degree, many large degrees of debt. And if we can fill up their grounds, so much the better. And I'd be able to see more matches, but I don't think it's just me. Like you say, there's lots of other people that would go. And I think we've just gone too far one way. The future, I think Millwall are brilliant working in the community. One of the leaders in the whole of the Football League, in my view, in terms of what I've seen, what I've heard. And I think that's really important. And I just hope that we can continue to set that example and be a number one club in that respect.
I think obviously I can't really comment on the past because I never was at the old den. So, but I think I would imagine there's probably a lot of supporters who would share that sentiment. I think that's something that probably is echoed a lot with the future. With the present, I think spot on. Sometimes especially when you go to places, they didn't do it this year, but QPR sometimes don't give us the bottom tier. They only give us the top tier. And you just think, like this year, we sold it out. It was a cracking atmosphere. We would sell it out every season, but sometimes they don't. And I quite agree. I think sometimes you might make a decision on the day of a game to go, and obviously you can't because of the restrictions. And absolutely agree with the work in the community.
But we don't give out the bottom tier either as much as we should.
No, we don't. And that's also a very interesting point because we've started to do it this year, but I feel like we've only started to do it this year because
pick and choose, I think.
Yes, it is pick and choose. And I think it's something that needs to be looked at. Whilst every club possibly aren't going to take top and bottom, I think the opportunity should be there and it should be something that's looked at because perhaps if you do get a smaller away following, for example, a Wigan, a Huddersfield, who might not bring as many. I think there should be some kind of safety way of getting home supporters into that end to be able to give some form of atmosphere. So we are very similar in that sense. We don't always give perhaps a full allocation, and it's something I think the club definitely need to be looking at. Couple of quirky questions. We're almost towards the end. A couple of quirky questions that I actually quite like. I can see you've got your away shirt on, this season's away shirt for the recording. Favourite football shirt? It doesn't necessarily have to be a Millwall shirt. Obviously, ideally it would be, but as a kid, was you a replica shirt fan? What's the best one you've had?
We were a pretty poor family, so I didn't get a shirt until I went to work and was able to buy one myself. Right, I like the Captain Morgan shirt. Never owned one,
cracking shirt.
But I love that shirt and that colour. I never really understood why they moved away from that colour. Actually, if I'm honest, and I think there was a period I hadn't gone for about 2 or 3 years, and then I came and we'd gone to this darker shade. And it took me a while to get used to it. I quite like it now, actually, but just a bit of background. And that Captain Morgan shirt was equated with a really good season, and also probably that would be the favourite that I remember. I quite like the it's not sky blue, but that blue away kit we had last season. Yes. Sea blue, whatever colour. I like that. I must have worn it so much that half of the advertising has fallen off it now. So that's a real sign that I really liked it, because most of my shirts look like they're in mint condition.
Funny enough, I actually play football on a Monday night. That's what I was doing obviously before we recorded this, and we play in blue, and that's that blue shirt that you described there. That's the one I wear. So no, that was a lovely kit. That was a nice kit. So, obviously, we couldn't have it for the home kit because we are a darker blue side, but it was a very nice kit. It is a nice one. And interesting, I'm going to word this one slightly differently. Obviously, we've got best piece of Millwall memorabilia, but best piece of footballing memorabilia that you have?
Well, thank you, because I haven't got any. I mean, I have got some pretty old Millwall programs going back to the 50s, somewhere among the 20,000 collection in my loft. Right. If my missus hasn't managed to surreptitiously throw them away. But probably the best bit of football memorabilia I have will be an exit sign from Plough Lane, the old Wimbledon ground. Yeah. Because whatever I might say about the current club, that place and the original club holds a lot in my heart. So I remember going and taking that off sometime after the ground was shut. Nobody had looted it, so we went and got it one evening, and I've proudly kept that ever since. Although now you ask and now I mention it, I'm thinking, where the hell is it? I hope that hasn't been thrown in the skip and all. I'll be very upset. But
you'll have to
that's probably what I have.
You'll have to look for it.
I might be having to go up the loft after this. Yeah. Oh, God.
I'll finish. I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball question. It's just one for this season and this season only. Do you think this current team will make the top 6? Putting you on the spot here.
Well, I'm hoping. I think we'll probably know after tomorrow. A win tomorrow, I think we've got a very high percentage chance of doing it. But we have to be able to win at home against the best other teams in the division if we're going to make it. But I think this is the best chance in the whole time we've been back in the Championship of making it. So fingers crossed. Of course, it comes down to having a small squad and players keeping fit and healthy, and we've lost a couple. So it's a bit tight. But I feel after Saturday, I'm always someone who's more of a glass half full than half empty person. So I'm going for it. Of course, I'll be gutted because if we do, I probably won't even get a ticket for the bloody playoff. But there we are.
Well, Andrew, it's been fascinating. It's been quite an interesting conversation. Obviously, having the links to Wimbledon and Millwall and having stories to tell from a very, I think, a very unique perspective. Someone who obviously travels the world and flies the Millwall flag is something that's absolutely great, and it's been really good to have you on. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time.
Been a pleasure, Stephen, and we should give a shout out for all of these fans we have around the world, all the supporters club. Many countries, even our friends in Russia, who of course regularly in the South London press and other papers advocating for peace, which I really appreciate. But fan groups all over the place, from Africa, from America, and Argentina, of course.
Absolutely,
we should say big salute to all of you for what you do.
Yeah, as I say, that's a fitting way to end there. I think we've got supporters all around the world, and of course, this has been Who Are You? And if there are any supporters around the world, you don't necessarily have to come from Southeast London to get involved with this. If whether you're in Europe, in Asia, America, if you'd like to come on and talk about your Millwall experiences, please follow us on social media at that Millwall Pod, and get in contact. We'll be more than happy to have you guys on there. This will go out as a podcast, obviously on Spotify, on the website, and it will also go out on YouTube. As I say, please like and subscribe on social media. And I say, if you'd like to be involved, then by all means, drop us a message, and we'll be happy to get you on the show. Again, thank you very much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to the next show.